Well, hello and welcome or welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some lifey chit chat and catch up. So it's been a little wonky to film this week, and I guess we'll come back to that, but it's been difficult to film because open houses immediately outside of my house. So I read a couple things this week, or I finished up things that I was already in progress with pretty much. So the first thing that I finished was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. My first read from Ashley Poston, and I knew a lot of what she writes is sort of in the fluffier vein, and this was that, though it does have some real heartfelt content to it. So this was nothing like what I expected. No, it was not a contemporary romance. It's pretty straight up contemporary women's fiction, general fiction, with a romantic subplot, very subplot. So the story here, we're following Florence Day, this writer who is working as a ghostwriter for a famous, very prolific romance author who's really well known, kind of a Danielle Steele type it seems, who is very reclusive. And she has a multi-book contract that Florence is fulfilling for her, more or less. And unfortunately, Florence has run out the clock on her contract to deliver her latest book, and isn't able to write. She had a breakup a year ago and is not getting over it and just has not been able to write ever since. So that kind of is a misleading beginning to the book, because within the first couple of chapters, immediately, you learn it's not really the breakup that is the problem, yet she keeps portraying it as the breakup. It's the fact that Florence's long-term serious boyfriend was basically lying to her about every aspect of his life while stealing all of the details of her life to write his own book. And that's pretty traumatic. That's a massive, massive betrayal, right? So I feel like that was slipped under the rug a little bit when it should have been taken more seriously. And I think that was one of my gripes throughout the book. So Florence at the beginning is struggling with that and the difficulty of getting over this relationship when all of a sudden her father dies. And he was a funeral director back home in a small town. Florence, somehow connected to this, also sees ghosts. And so she's the weird kid who solved a murder in her youth because she could see ghosts. So that's an awful lot going on just to start from. But I would say I do think this came together, even despite having all of those elements. And it was a good time to read while also having some deeper conversations, but not going into a lot of nuance. She is coming into this situation from a distance, having left the small town. It's got a lot of those common tropes there, where her family feel like she's at a distance from them. And so she's somewhat reconnecting with her family while also pursuing her father's last will, all these weird tasks that he wants done for his funeral, more or less. And so it has an element of her going about figuring out just the basics of these tasks that have been listed off in his will and trying to execute them, seemingly impossible at times. In the process, she learns a little bit about her father, but it never really came together as some bigger thing to me that I thought it was leading toward. It's just her working through them and executing on the will, really. So I felt like there could have been more there that there wasn't. So I did really like this, though. I think it was a good time, and I enjoyed my time with it, but it won't be super memorable, and it did not dive into anything significant. The romance felt too insubstantial to me, and other than it just not really diving into any of the plot threads significantly, I felt that there were a couple things that actively put me off, that did not work. The main one being that it engaged very lightly in sexual assault and physical assault. And that's kind of becoming a trope a little bit, particularly in romance, though this doesn't quite fit in romance. Like, there is this moment early on when she's just met the hot new boss and at her publisher, and almost immediately after, she's in a bar situation and decides to just kiss a random stranger without asking them first, and does so, and of course it's the hot new boss. And that happens a lot as a meet cute and that kind of stuff, but I just hate it. I really hate it. You also don't just punch people you're mad at. Like, that's not a reasonable or acceptable thing to do. Unfortunately, that comes up a lot as well. So those just instantly put me off very, very strongly. So yeah, I enjoyed this. It was for my book club and we had a great time discussing it, but I don't think it's going to persist with me. And I would read more from Ashley Poston for sure. The next thing that I read was A Daughter of Fair Verona by Christina Dodd. And I had never heard of this, but apparently this is wildly popular, so do with that what you will. I think I got out of this very mixed feelings, and it wasn't really what I expected either. So mainly that this is sort of anachronistic, or too anachronistic for my liking, because we're following a young Rosalind, or Rosie, the adult daughter of Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare's play. They have lived on past what literally was their tragic ending, had a family, and are this very well-known loving couple in Verona. So Rosie, though, is 20 years old and very much a spinster as a result of still being at that age and unwed, but she keeps rebuffing all of her betrothals. After many years of betrothals, she has finally been betrothed to Duke Stefano, who is very, very obviously a villain character, like evil. His previous wives have all died, and everyone kind of openly secret knows that he killed them or poisoned them. Something eerie is going on there, and he's not a nice guy. And so clearly Rosie does not want to marry him. But before, she can refuse, he ends up dead. And she is the main suspect. So what goes from there is not a very linear mystery. It's just sort of her running around frantically, but not with any tension, trying to figure things out. But yet, the whole time I felt it was very unfocused on the mystery, if that makes any sense. It just felt very all over the place. It was written much more for drama, lots and lots of crescendos toward what feels like a cliffhanger that doesn't really pan out, a whole lot of pulling in Shakespeare quotes and names of characters, and so it felt very gimmicky. But the real main anachronistic element that put me off is how it very much is trying to be historical and incorporating a lot of historical social structure elements, while also having a very casual voice, really like brash, fast-talking tone to a woman character, and never really holding people accountable consistently for their actions in a way that would have been societally appropriate. But in terms of the history that it's enforcing on the story, it's largely surrounding her being a spinster and her virginity, which comes up over and over and over and over and over again, truly, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all, except that social value of her being too old and still being a virgin is hammered on by everyone else, directed toward her in a very, very negative light. And that just really grated on me as it continued to go. And it's brought up so much, like every few pages. I thought there was going to be some massive aspect to that, and it felt like, as well, that didn't really pan out. The way this concluded, even, I won't get into spoilers, really, but it came out of nowhere. I don't believe this is a solvable mystery based on the information that you get at all, and I just prefer that have been thought through and really delivered in a linear way that you can actually follow the thread of. And it was like, what just happened for me? So I feel like this was more style than substance, definitely. It was about having a good time, and I think I mostly had a good time with it. I enjoyed reading it, and it's kind of propulsive, but I didn't love it, and it's very much on the lower end of kind of meh. It was fine. So onward to a much, much better experience. My winner of the week was Do Nothing by Celeste Headlee. So this is nonfiction, and it's very focused on work culture, particularly in the Western world. So I think for me, the beginning and the end were really the parts I connected with the most, while the middle felt really applicable, but not to me. And so it wasn't as personal, I think. So through this book, we're talking about, at the very beginning, the sort of history and origins of work culture in the US especially, and this sort of Puritan work ethic that everyone talks about. So we're getting that origin story, while also talking about the ways that productivity and efficiency have really improved over the years, and sort of the promise of the American dream and the idea of your work equaling your payment and benefits becoming increasingly disparate, and the feelings of insufficiency that come out of that. The connection of values and virtues with work or overwork specifically, the ways we talk about work with each other as a society. I loved that grounding of it. And I feel like through the book, it does a great job of sort of segmenting off how significantly we draw personal value and identity from our work. So I really loved that. I think for me, the middle was less successful because when we're talking about things like efficiency and productivity, it focused on people that are the mass, basically, which are sort of lower level workers, people that are entering the workforce, that are very caught up in jobs that are sort of unskilled and require them to be there for a certain amount of time while doing kind of useless work. And I think that it diverged there from what I was interested in by completely skipping over something I had referenced earlier. So earlier in the book, there is a mention of this weird dichotomy where newer workers or lower level workers, those who are paid less, are actually working less because they're sort of working the hours they have, and then they're able to just leave the work at work very often. Whereas higher level workers are just sort of crazy overworked and working all of these hours because there is a chasm in expertise. There's this big jump based on current corporate work practices primarily, where there isn't a normal step-by-step career progression as a result of things like contracting and offshoring, where that career progression started you at entry level and you stayed and continued growing and building, and that just doesn't exist anymore. And so I felt like the latter half of that completely got cut out in the middle. So that aspect, I wish she had dived deeper into, I think, because I sort of disconnected, because I recognized she was targeting the people that are affected the most, or the most common experience of these lower level workers who are being very productive, but not using their time productively because they have to fill these hours. And also because work-life balance has gotten really screwed up to where you're doing your day-to-day tasks that have to happen during the day, during your work hours as well. And so that blending, the author talks a lot about how that makes us feel like we're working because there is no delineation between work time and personal time anymore, very, very often. And so I think it was overly focused on office work as well, because most of what this was talking about is the type of thing I would think of as a typical office job. The other thing very focused on in the middle that I did not resonate with was social media use, and just the amount of time that we are filling with social media, the way we're portraying our lives on social media somewhat. But I'm already not very active on social media and have pretty solidly disengaged from most forms of social media except for YouTube. So that was less applicable to me. I think that the beginning and the end together did a great job of talking through how much shifting perception as a society starts at sort of the individual level, where we can move away from reinforcing those societal valuation of work just for work's sake and treating working and overworking as virtuous or meaningful in any way, and shifting more toward work as a means to an end, where our priorities are on having time, on being bored sometimes because that's good for us, on play, and centering our own use of our time rather than an employer's use of our time in our lives. And so I just found that very, very useful and meaningful. So I think that the one other thing I would say about this one, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought this was fantastic. But I don't think it's doing anything super radical or revolutionary in terms of the topics that it's talking about. I think this would be a good gateway book. It's very accessible and easy to get into, and it's tackling some things that are very broad experiences, very common experiences. So I think it's pretty accessible and easy to get into as a starter for getting into these conversations about work culture and anti-work ideals, that sort of thing. So from a sociological perspective, it's a good starter. It didn't surprise me with anything that it was talking about, but as I said, really effective book, I thought, and really communicating clearly about a topic that I think is very, very important. Looking toward my next week, kind of a sneak peek, I guess, is that I started the Hyunamdong bookshop. So I haven't finished it yet, but that's my currently in progress book, and it really is interestingly dovetailing very much in the topics of do nothing. So that has been really curious that I came immediately from one book I was really liking on the topic to another book that I can safely say I'm really liking on a similar topic but in fiction. So that's really the only thing I am actively reading. I haven't picked up a print book yet, and I don't know where I'm going to go next. So onward to my week in other media. I watched a couple things that were really, really good. I think I finished this at the end of last week, maybe, but I don't think I talked about it last week. If I did, I will chop this out. But Toxic Towns on Netflix, so good. It is a true sort of corporate crime story. It's not a docuseries, it's a dramatization with some really big name British actors, because it's set in the UK. And it follows this situation with waste dumping by a corporation that was sort of covered up and affected the health and well-being of an entire community very, very negatively. And you are watching all these families raising children who are affected by this. And it was the hardest aspect of this, more so than the horror that happened, seeing parents really react badly to a child being born disfigured or disabled. And I felt like those depictions were really real, but really, really hard to watch. And I think they just did a great job of relaying the harms at every level that happened through this situation. But it was so interesting to come to this from having read Paradise Falls a couple of years ago, which is a nonfiction book about an almost identical situation a few decades earlier in Paradise Falls, New York, so one that happened in the US. And the situations are so similar, and the way they played out are so similar. The one in the UK is much more recent, though, and it is hard to see a lot of the political responses being very, very similar as well. So if you, like me, I think around the BookTube Prize a couple of years ago, Paradise Falls was in the prize, and I read it for that, and it completely caught everyone that read it for that by surprise, pretty much. And so many people loved it, and it was a favorite book for many, many people. So if you were in that crowd, definitely check out Toxic Town, because it hits exactly the same story. It's a very important story to tell and share so that people know the reasons why we have things like environmental regulations. It's very important that we have those things in place, because otherwise these problematic situations with our health continue to happen. So I watched that as a heavy option. And then as a much lighter and nicer option, I watched A Nice Indian Boy. Such a lovely, lovely movie. It was more serious than I expected. I was kind of expecting it to just be pure silliness, and it's not. It is a comedy, though, primarily, and we're following two guys. One of them is sort of ethnically and culturally Indian and gay, and the other one is outwardly, very obviously, a white man, but he was adopted by Indian parents, and so he's extremely culturally Indian and is very proud of his roots and traditions surrounding that. His adopted parents have passed away, but he just embraced that culture so much and felt at home and very loved and cherished by his family. So the ethnically and culturally Indian guy, however, feels very closed off about his culture. He's kind of embarrassed by bringing his gayness into his family, who are clearly trying very, very hard to welcome and accept him. Like, they keep watching gay TV and stuff while they're there. It's really funny and awkward in that way of real family dynamics. And Zarna Garg is his mom, who, if you've seen, she's very, very funny. But the story is not a romance as much as I expected. It's so much more about those family dynamics. And one guy who just tries to keep his family, who love him very much, at arm's length, and wants to silo off parts of his life, really learning to embrace his family, loving him in the way that they know how, and including them in his loving relationship, and everybody sort of coming together. And it was just so beautiful and lovely and heartwarming. So I really, really recommend that one. It was so funny and so poignant, just on every level. Really, really great movie. So otherwise, my week, as you can see, possibly it's super dark. Weather has been really wild again. We had a cool down for about a week, and we're back on extreme heat warnings. So I think last week was the only week that we've not been on extreme heat warnings for the entirety of the summer. And it's just getting very defeating. And throughout all of these extreme heat warnings, we've had really volatile weather where storms just sort of come and go very, very rapidly. And that's what's happening right now, sort of out of nowhere. We get like 2 hours of it being very stormy, and it started raining despite there being no expectation of rain. So weather's been rough. As well, as I said up front, it's been a weird time for filming, not only because of the lighting, the weather being chaotic, but because my neighbor moved and the realtors have been in and out with people a lot, but they've been doing open houses this weekend. And I have kind of like an L-shaped setup with the buildings where mine faces out immediately to the entrance to their place. And so there have been people like immediately outside the windows that are kind of right behind me. So I try not to film when there are people just around all over the place. But that's been very chaotic to no end. And when I'm having a moment where I'm actually feeling like filming and having time to film, often that has not been coinciding. So it's been a little challenging to get a chance to film. But I am here doing it because I wanted to catch up on the books for this week. So other than that, I think it's been a generally good week. Busy, but I had kind of a slowdown this weekend. I had a very quiet weekend. A couple of things were canceled, which was very helpful because last weekend there was just a bunch of personal stuff to where I was going all weekend, all day, every day. And this weekend I've not had anything I had to do. So that's been very, very nice. I even slept in an hour late, which is very unusual for me. And the cats were in a tizzy about it because you do not feed cats late. That is a rule. Otherwise they start eating you. So I was not eaten quite yet, but they were close. So I think that is all for right now, but I have one recommendation for you that is not a video, oddly. It's a sale. Not anything that I'm benefiting from whatsoever other than as a purchaser. So 7 Stories Press, who I have the lovely Octavia Butler editions from, they publish sort of specifically writing that is radical politics, more or less, or features some level of that in fiction and nonfiction. They also publish different writing styles, so poetry, essays, prose, all over the map. Most of what they carry is like reprintings of things, and they have a very broad catalog though. And they are doing, in honor of Women in Translation Month, a 25% off sale for Women in Translation works. And they have a lot of great stuff like Annie Ernaux reprintings and Olga Tokarczuk, both of whom I have read and loved. So they have a lot of great stuff. 25% off is a very good savings for their work, and they are sort of an indie publisher that is doing great work. So I highly recommend going to check it out because everything that I ordered previously from them was very high quality. So I will link that in the description box down below to check out. As far as I saw, there's not anything special required, or like no membership or anything. It's just a general sale for WIT month. So anyway, I think that is all for my week. For this week, I have, as usual, rambled on quite too long. So with that, I will leave you and say I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for watching.